Pyro's role in TF2 is weird. Unlike other classes that can often be categorized into specific roles, Pyro doesn't really fit into one category. Classes like Sniper, Spy, and Scout can be considered pick classes, while classes like Soldier and Demo can be considered generalists. But Pyro's messiness makes it difficult to define their role. They can attack, defend, and support, but doesn't excel in any particular area. And I don't think Valve has the clearest idea either, because, well, when you see how much weapons define what style of play you engage in, this is where Pyro's melee problem becomes apparent. Let's be honest here, out of the 9 melees Pyro currently has, the only viable one is the Power Jack, and maybe the Back Scratcher and Extinguisher. That's almost 70% of Pyro's melee options being useless, and to understand what the problem is, I think we need to understand what goals Pyro's melees serve in the first place. I'm going to be sorting Pyro's melees into 3 main categories. The first group of weapons are utility melees. These ones provide some sort of on-wearer effect that improves quality of life. The second group of weapons are aggressive melees. These ones encourage you to hit your opponents with your melee to get some sort of bonus. And the third group of weapons are niche melees. These ones capitalize on a specific situation and are only helpful then. There are a couple weapons that kind of blend in with multiple sections, so I'll be providing a sort of Venn diagram that sorts the weapons in, and here's what they are. So the Power Jack falls under pure utility melees, the Hot Hand, Extinguisher, and Back Scratcher fall under aggressive utility melees, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment and Stalk are pure aggressive melees, the Third Degree and Neon Annihilator fall under aggressive niche melees, and finally the Homewrecker falls under pure niche melees. With this in mind, let's go down the Venn diagram and explain why each one does well in its respective category, or does awful. I'll include a little list at the end summarizing the benefits or problems of each melee so that it's easier to understand the issues. The Power Jack is pretty simple. You move 15% faster, but you take 20% more damage while this is active, and you also gain 25 health on a melee kill. Surprisingly, movement in a movement-based shooter is a good thing. It lets you get to the front lines faster and lets you back out of tough situations faster. But what makes the Power Jack such a perfect utility weapon is the fact that it's active whenever you want it. No need to hit an enemy to get the boost, you just pull it out and you get the speed. Which is where the problem of the Hot Hand comes in. It also provides a speed boost, so why does the Hot Hand fail miserably? Simply put, the speed boost isn't worth taking out your melee for. Not only does the Hot Hand deal less damage than Stock, a miserable 56 across 2 slaps compared to Stock's 65, but the speed boost is 1 second. It doesn't even stack, so you're stuck resetting your second long speed boost with your melee out. As far as role as a damage dealer, well, it's a melee weapon that deals less damage than the Stock Fire Axe, and obviously less damage than your primary or secondary. Yeah, this thing sucks even for a meme weapon. The Extinguisher is an interesting case because when you think about it, it doesn't really seem like a utility melee. It mini-crits burning enemies and then extinguishes them, dealing increased damage based on afterburn duration and also granting a 3-second speed boost on melee kill. How much extra damage this deals is 4 damage for each tick of remaining afterburn. On the downside, it holsters in around 0.7 seconds, deals 44 base damage, and cannot get random crits. Although I'm not ignoring the fact that this can deal 103 damage with just 4 seconds of afterburn, which is the minimum your flamethrower can apply, I still think that the increased damage is largely redundant. Flamethrowers deal about 10 damage at mid to close range and have a firing interval of 0.075 seconds, so in a second your primary will have dealt around 130 damage. This means that on classes that aren't heavy, Demo Knight, or overhealed, it's just safer to use your flamethrower than to use that extinguisher, as you have to pull your melee out and close the gap, which is a risk some might not want to take. This means that the speed boost is the most appealing part, being 3 times better than the Hot Hands and letting you close gaps or escape from situations much better. The speed boost is probably one of the best parts of this weapon, but if you've got to pull your melee out and kill somebody with it to get the boost, I think it makes sense why it pales in comparison to the Power Jack. All around utility is usually better than burst utility that requires risk, but the Extinguisher is still alright. Now rounding off the aggressive utility melees, we have the Back Scratcher. The Back Scratcher's purpose is pretty simple. It gives you increased healing from health packs in return for less healing from mediguns, dispensers, and payload carts. It's a weapon that encourages flanking and roaming rather than playing with your team, which is a gameplay style that many people like to incorporate. As for why it's partly aggressive, I think that the 81 damage swing does a similar purpose to the Extinguisher and thus makes it somewhat aggressive. The Back Scratcher is incredibly okay. It fills in a situational niche that is less applicable than the universal Power Jack, but still applicable enough to keep it standing. Moving on to aggressive melees, we have one of Pyro's least used melees. The sharpened volcano fragment is pretty cut and dry. You deal 52 damage, but in return you deal around 7 seconds of afterburn. Pulling your melee out aggressively as Pyro is already a downside, but the only upside you have for doing so is a mechanic that your primary does infinitely better, both in the damage and range department. It's because of this that the volcano fragment is largely redundant. Which leads us into the stock Fire Axe. I know this has been said before, but using your melee for damage as the close range class when you have 2 other slots that deal more damage and at a range is just dumb. Like the volcano fragment, the stock Fire Axe is just redundant. So now we bring aggressive niches into the mix, with the first one being the third degree. This is TF2's only literal straight upgrade, and it's still garbage. This is just a stock Fire Axe, but it hits all people connected via Medibeam. Alright, let's analyze this stat. To get use out of this weapon, there must first be a medic and his patient. You must then get close to said medic and his patient, and then use your melee to hit them. You then hope that you either get a random crit or you don't get shredded to death by a max ramp of minigun while you have your melee out. The amount of setup this weapon requires and the luck in pulling a kill off is just not worth it. I don't deny it's funny when you do get a kill, but for a single nutty play you'll probably have to try about 30 times and hope the respawn timer is feeling nice. The second aggressive niche melee is the Neon Annihilator, and this weapon is just a cesspool of priorities. So this thing breaks sappers in 2 hits and also crits wet enemies, which is basically water, Girardi, or Mad Milk. On the downside, you deal 52 damage against players and you can't get random crits. Want a Pyro? Use the Homewrecker. Want to crit enemies? Use the Extinguisher. So this thing only works if you are a number 1 on like the 5 maps that have water in places people actually go to, number 2 are with a Mad Milk buddy, or number 3 are with an Engineer buddy. Do you see the problem? It's so all over the place yet redundant and situational that it doesn't really accomplish anything. Which brings me into the Homewrecker. Oh man, I hate the Homewrecker. So this weapon deals double damage to buildings and also instantly breaks sappers. In return, you deal 49 damage towards players. I'll be real here, you are never going to use this to break an engineer's buildings. Even without the Homewrecker, Pyro will either shred through buildings or die immediately, all depending on whether the engineer has a sentry up, and that does not change whether you equip the Homewrecker or not. So with that reason thrown into the garbage, the only reason you would use this is to break sappers. When a spy successfully saps a building, he has either dealt with the engineer or has chosen an opportune moment to strike. And in those situations, he should be rewarded. But no, a Pyro that's standing around hard counters your sap and then hard counters you as well. And from the Pyro side, if you're not babysitting the engineer, then the only time this weapon is coming into play is when there is a sap teleporter at spawn. It's a hyper situational design that isn't fun to play with unless you enjoy watching paint dry, and it isn't exactly fun to play against either. So what can we get from all of that? What makes weapons like the Back Scratcher or Power Jack good, and what makes weapons like the Neon Annihilator or Hot Hand bad? Well, it largely comes down to how reliable and generally applicable they are. So how would we fix the bad weapons? Now, I'll admit, I'm not the best at rebalancing and some of these are kind of out there, but I'd like to share my thoughts nonetheless. I'll be providing reworks of everything except for the Back Scratcher, Power Jack, and stock Fire Axe. If you have any other ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments. Starting with the Hot Hand, I do think that having an alternative to the Power Jack isn't a bad idea, but the main issue with the current Hot Hand is just that it isn't worth it to pull it out, so I decided to make that speed boost more substantial. Rather than providing speed on demand, my version of the Hot Hand provides a higher risk but higher reward speed option compared to the Power Jack. You don't deal as much damage, but by stacking up hits you can easily stack much more meaningful 3-second speed boosts on wearer for a while, which I think works fine as a goofier side grade to the Power Jack. To be fair, the Extinguisher is fine in TF2. It could do with some cleaning up and maybe some stronger finishing potential, but it's mostly just minor issues. And to be honest, I never really liked the downsides of the Extinguisher. The slower holster speed didn't change much, around 0.2 seconds, and the damage penalty felt like overkill when aggressive melees were already worse on Pyro. So because of that, I replaced the slower holster speed and damage penalty with a slower swing speed, since it's a finisher and not a sustained damage dealer. What that does is indirectly buff the damage, letting you deal more damage faster, and that's pretty much it, cleaning up the downsides. Now onto the sharpened volcano fragment. I'll be honest here, this is the only one I genuinely could not think of anything for. So this thing is a giant piece of rock with lava on it, which means that the design has to do with fire. But from all the options I could think of, everything just seemed redundant. Make it afterburn related? Nope, afterburn is too unreliable. I even had a version that gave you speed or health per afterburn tick, but if you want speed or health, just use other melees. Anyways, make it deal bonus effects versus burning enemies? Nope, Extinguisher exists. Fireball? Nope, too tacky and flares exist. Charge up fire mechanic? Nope, either too annoying or redundant because of the extinguisher. I can come up with a mediocre rebalance for sure, but having one that isn't redundant or weird is really tough. Hell, making an extinguisher reskin or something. So a bit of an anticlimactic segment, but if you do have any ideas, please share them. I'm genuinely stumped here. Anyways, the third degree's problem was that its whole AoE shtick was limited to medic, so I was originally thinking of how I could make this deal damage to multiple enemies while also pairing with the Flog, since they're in the same set. So I kinda thought, hey, sometimes Air Blast is used to deny pushes, so why don't you make the third degree do that? So what my version of the third degree does is cause an AoE shockwave, maybe a bit bigger than Rocket Splash, that also knocks all enemies back while also damaging them. However, since you're using your melee to knock enemies back, you should be using your flamethrower to do that less. But I don't think that's enough to warrant using it yet, so I also made it so that you can use it to have some vertical mobility, allowing you to get into certain positions without using the detonator or thermal thruster. And no random crits is just to make sure that you're not accidentally wiping half their team in a single swing. Now moving on to the Neon Annihilator, this one was pretty hard. I didn't like any of the upsides, but fitting in theme with a giant electric signboard was tough, but I ended up thinking of a way to still let it Pyro Shark but also being more generally applicable. So the Neon Annihilator is a bar sign, and bars serve drinks, so let's make Pyro serve drinks. You can cycle through different debuff effects like Gas, Mad Milk, Durati, or Bleed, and then apply them to enemies on hit. On the downside, it should be more of an investment to pull this out, and to limit the amount of Mad Milk or Durati you can apply, you can only use this once every 15 seconds. I think this allows a flanking Pyro to maximize their damage or survivability depending on the situation, and also having the ability to actually hit an enemy with their melee. And if you want to Pyro Shark, you can still Pyro Shark, or you can go for a double melee hit if you're feeling spicy. Now I'm kind of unsure whether this will be good mainly because it's a melee that requires you to hit an enemy to get the effect, and that in and of itself is pretty tough, but I think as a concept it works fine. And finally we get to the Homewrecker. I originally thought of buffing Pyro without making it destroy sappers, but I realized how awful that would be to balance, because it's not so much about Pyro's balance now, but Engineer's balance. Engineer is built around being a defensive stronghold that takes a while to set up, and with coordination should be able to be destroyed easily. If a Pyro could help upgrade, nests would be set up much faster. If a Pyro could help repair, nests would be much harder to take down. If a Pyro could buff buildings, the Pyro would still have to stand around beside the Engineer. Because of that, I decided to avoid Pyro as a whole and instead focused on the weapon being a sledgehammer. So sledgehammers are really heavy, so what if it made Pyro really heavy? And this is where I realized that Pyro had a niche that needed to be filled in, which was closing the gap. While things like the detonator and even the power jet can do that, I wanted one that could act similarly to the Fist of Steel, since it's about making Pyro heavier. So here it is, providing a weapon that makes Pyro a bit tankier and unable to be knocked back. In return, you should put more thought in whether you should deploy it and also fire a bit slower, since it's a sledgehammer. I also know that overheal might be a problem, but a 25% damage resistance on Pyro plus overheal isn't the end of the world if they're running with their melee. Well anyways, that's everything. I know a lot of these weapons have been discussed before, but I wanted to put everything into one video so people can really understand the reasoning behind why these melees are so bad, and hopefully you found this informative. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in 3 months. Yeah, probably 3 months. Yeah, okay, bye.